Opagaka. Welcome everyone. My name is Leah Lindrea-Morrison and I am a Yorta Yorta woman and I am the Aboriginal Research Assistant for the ASQ-STEPS research program. I am here today to talk to you about the work we are doing to develop a culturally appropriate developmental outcome measure for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. I will provide a little bit of the background to our work, then talk to you about our research program. Isabel Brookes, the ASQ-STEPS project coordinator, will join me for the Q&A at the end of the session. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge Yorta Yorta and Bangarang, traditional owners on which the Ngar-wu, Wanyarra, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Conference is being held. We are recording from Aranda country today, but we'll join you from Ghana country for the Q&A. We would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands, and I extend that acknowledgement to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander attendees. During this presentation, when I use the word Aboriginal, I am acknowledging both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Before I talk about the ASQ-STEPS, it's important to talk about the work that has previously been done. The ASQ track is the first developmental screening tool that has been adapted for Aboriginal children. The ASQ track was adapted from the mainstream Ages and Stages questionnaire and is being used widely around Australia. This tool involves questionnaires for each age interval and is used with caregivers for early detection of developmental difficulties. It is validated as a screening tool, but has limitations when used to measure progress or change over time. This means that we need another culturally appropriate tool. To address this need, our team is developing a new tool called the ASQ-STEPS. The ASQ-STEPS is an instrument that can measure developmental outcomes. In other words, how a child is developing or progressing over time. So it can be used in additional ways to the ASQ track. This is important because we now have many early childhood programs being implemented for Aboriginal children, but we don't have a culturally appropriate way to measure the impact of these programs. That is, the impact of children's developmental progress. The ASQ-STEPS will give us a tool that can help us understand which early childhood programs make the most difference to a child's development, or which programs are having an impact. Now that I have explained the need, I'm going to tell you about the ASQ-STEPS. The ASQ-STEPS is what we call a developmental outcome measure. It provides a more comprehensive assessment of a child's development status compared to a screening tool. It is used over multiple administrations with a child, and we can then understand their developmental progress. Importantly, this is the first tool of this kind that is being adapted for Aboriginal children. The ASQ-STEP covers 5 domains or areas of development: how children communicate, for example, talking and listening; how they move, so gross motor and fine motor skills; how they think, known as the problem-solving domain; and personal, social, which is how children act with other people and behave. So this leads us to the discussion of how we are making the ASQ-STEPS a reality. To create the ASQ-STEPS, a 3-part research program was planned. First, developing the ASQ-STEPS prototype. This phase has been completed. Second, pre-testing or piloting it, which we are in the middle of right now. Finally, testing it to make sure it accurately collects the information it is intended to. This is called validation. These are the 3 steps we need to complete to make the ASQ-STEPS available to services working with Aboriginal children in Australia. The next section of slides will provide an overview of these phases and report on the progress to date. The first part of the research was to create the ASQ-STEPS. The ASQ-STEPS is made up from all of the questions that make up the 21 mainstream ages and stages questionnaires. Only 7 of these questionnaires were modified to develop the ASQ track. So to make the prototype, we needed to culturally adapt the remaining questions. We worked with community members, cultural experts, early child development experts, and a linguist to review each of the questions and make culturally relevant changes. We also worked with the same ASQ track artists to create illustrations for each of the newly adapted questions. Once the questions and illustrations were completed, they were reviewed by the authors of the mainstream ages and stages questionnaires. Then a consensus group, pictured here, made the final decision about the wording and visual representation. A key part of the research process was also to establish an Indigenous reference group. This developed as an extension of the consensus group that conducted the final review of the ASQ-STEPS questions and illustrations. The reference group guides and advises on research and engagement processes, the interpretation of data, and how the ASQ-STEPS can work best for their communities and organisations. They have also been instrumental in creating the artwork and logo for the tool, which is pictured here. These women are champions for equity in health and education for Aboriginal children that stems from culturally appropriate approaches. So that work gave us a prototype. The next phase of the research program is seeing how the prototype works in practice. This is called the pre-testing, which we are currently doing now. For this phase, we have partnered with Central Australian Aboriginal Congress, the largest Aboriginal community-controlled Aboriginal health service in the Northern Territory, and with Ngar-wu Yunti in South Australia. It has been an interesting and challenging step for a few reasons. This work was meant to happen in March 2020, but because of COVID, we have spent the last 18 months rescheduling the research. In August this year, we decided the only way to move forward was to complete quarantine and spend an extended time in the Northern Territory and South Australia. We spent the last 4 weeks in Alice Springs working with practitioners and their families to learn how to use the ASQ-STEPS. We've tried formats of the ASQ-STEPS to find the easiest way to administer it. We will be in Adelaide in October to repeat the process and gather some more feedback on how the tool should be used. The validation study is the final phase of the project, and we will be starting this next year. The aim of this study is to make sure the tool collects meaningful and accurate information. To do this, we will need to administer the ASQ-STEPS with about 250 children and their families. This project will include partnering with organisations from Victoria, the Northern Territory, South Australia, in urban, regional and remote settings. Once the validation project is finished, the ASQ-STEPS will be the first culturally appropriate, validated developmental outcome measure for Aboriginal children. It will strengthen our understanding of what works to promote Aboriginal children's development, contribute to building robust evidence for early childhood programs, promote quality improvement and equity of service provision, and to make sure findings go to programs that are proven to work. The reference group continues to play an important role in guiding this phase of the research. Our members value how participation gives them a voice and feel that this research has the potential to shift the pathway for our children. We hope that the reference group continues to feel empowered and take ownership of a tool that they have shaped for Aboriginal people. The relationship between group members and the research team continues to grow as we progress on the ASQ-STEPS journey, and we are thankful for their generous contributions. Thank you everyone for listening. We'd like to finish by once again acknowledging the partners of this project, in particular the Aboriginal community members who have collaborated on this work. Vera for now.